Karika, but in this great treatise of Brahmanavartika, treatise of epistemology, made of virtues that I have collected, and steady reflection and teaching and listening to. So whatever merit I have accrued, for the sake of all sentient beings, to be able to study this kind of science, may I be able to open their eyes, hundredfold reasoning, doors of reasoning, amazing, wondrous reasonings, and to enter into the profound the study of logic, so that they may enter into reference to name and objects, referential objects of concept. May I develop the four perceptions, the direct perceptions. May I be able to quickly understand and hear realization in these threefold reasonings of using effective reasoning, using natural properties as reasoning, and using non-perceptible things as reasoning, non-observed things as reasoning. And may I be able to differentiate between what is the correct inference and incorrect one, perceptions or conceptions. And so forth. So let us say the mandala offering, at the end of all the teachings, at final mandala, you may be able to show off your skill, not now, but just say the mandala offering straight away, without taking time. Syllogisms and incorrect syllogisms, which are the correct syllogisms, which are free from the faults of either excessiveness or omission or repetition. the consequential reductio ad absurdum logic, which helps in challenging the opponent's misconceptions, misunderstandings, to eliminate those misunderstandings. And especially regarding the teacher and the teaching, by using the evidence-based logic, or fact-based logic, the correct logic, the authoritativeness or the reliability of the teacher and the teaching. And having done that, may I be able to find the pure, impeccable path of the three types of beings, and all the paths, all aspects of the path of the types of beings through impeccable reasoning, the door of impeccable, by finding the impeccable reasoning. And as a branch of that path, may I use the 8 different types of logic, and through both the focusing and the analytical meditations, alternating between these over and over again, may I be able to eliminate the net of conception. Me and all others, that we have this opportunity to meet with this excellent teaching, this excellent treatise, is thanks to the kindness of the all-knowing one. And I dedicate this merit for me to be taken care of or led by the sublime leader. That's the end. So whenever we are engaged in this kind of Dharma discourse, from the side of the Lama also, they should have a pure motivation, not seeking, not showing off scholarship or looking for name, but to help the disciples. And on the part of the disciples also, you need to make the Dharma to become a Dharma practice. And if it is mixed with the 8 worldly concerns, it doesn't become this Dharma practice. As we usually say, the one verse of taking refuge and bodhicitta, generating bodhicitta or developing bodhicitta. I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I'm enlightened, Supreme Assembly. And so here we are concerned with the Dharma, that is Buddhism. And in order for our practice, our engagement in discourse of the Dharma to become a Dharma practice, we need the practice and the study, listening to the teaching and so forth, must be done on the basis of taking refuge. Not only thinking that the scriptures that are put up in the temples are sacred. And also similarly, it is the case with the Buddha statues and so forth. But in Uttara Tantra, there is the identification of these 3 jewels. And then it's more elaborate in Sutra Alamkara by Maitreya. And therefore, so with regard to this Dharma, maybe I should say it like this: we should be tamed. Our mind, in our mind stream, should be tamed, and therefore, saying the verse of taking refuge and bodhicitta, for our teaching, for our practices to become the teaching of the Buddha, practice the teaching of the Buddha, we need to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Why the Buddha is precious, so precious, is because of the Dharma. The Dharma referring to his realization, attainment, and that in turn is related to or based, dependent on the Sangha level of realization. And so by taking refuge, merely by taking refuge in the Buddha, we cannot fulfill our goals. As the Buddha himself has said, the sages do not wash away the sins, they do not take away, sins with water, nor do they remove the suffering of sentient beings with their hands, nor do they shift their own realization into others. But by teaching the reality, the truth, they help beings to liberation. And therefore, if we could understand what the cessation, true cessation and true path actually means, and if you actually attain them, there is such, the possibility of feeling relaxed and blissful. And the true cessation, the main true cessation refers to the liberation, which is called the peace beyond suffering. So if we could free ourselves from the bondage of these negative, destructive emotions, then the karmas which ensue from, which are created because of these negative emotions, also cease, and therefore we should take refuge mainly in the Dharma jewel. So this mind that we have is unruly, full of negative emotions. But if you think over and over, although someone may be a bad person in the earlier part of their life, then at the later part of their life, they could become ones who are able to actually slap the negative emotions, and therefore the teaching which actually teaches this path is the teaching of the Buddha. And so as this praise says, I prostrate to the Buddha who dispels the darkness of ignorance within sentient beings. It's not about, we are not here talking about attachment, being attached to our own tradition, but although there are many different religious traditions, maybe 15 or so, if you actually count all the sub-schools within Hinduism, for example, there may be many more. So amongst all these teachings, only Buddha is the one who has said that, and we should not, his followers should not just take his words for granted, thinking that it is true because he said it, but they should analyze, critically analyze, investigate, experiment, and if they see the teaching to be reason-based and also applicable and beneficial to them, they should accept the teaching. And so the Buddha himself with full confidence, has said this amongst all the different teachers of the different religious traditions. Only Shakyamuni Buddha has said this, and therefore, regarding the teaching of the Buddha, we can gain conviction through reasoning, investigation, and experiment. And therefore, the teacher who taught this teaching can be seen as someone who is rational, someone who is is logical, and not only that, But because there is a different, there are varieties of mental dispositions amongst his disciples regarding their intellect, and therefore he taught different philosophical systems also. It suggests that the sun dispels the darkness of the world. Likewise, the sun opens the lotus. Likewise, the Buddha's words open or dispels the darkness of sentient beings. And so, the Sangha are the ones whom we take as examples, look up to, and therefore we take refuge in the Buddha and Sangha as well. And so we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. How do we do that? By admiring the qualities that the Buddha and the Sangha have developed within themselves, with this faith of which is this clear faith or admiring faith, and also trusting them and gaining confidence in. And here we say, I take refuge until enlightenment is attained. And so here it is the Mahayana enlightenment we are talking about. Until that highest enlightenment is reached, that I'm taking refuge in the three jewels. And then the next two lines shows bodhicitta, this altruistic intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's not only just a state where you have overcome all the destructive emotions only, but you have also overcome all kinds of defilements in the mind, and thereby attain the Dharmakaya, which is qualified by the two purities. And therefore, that is, in order for one's practice of Dharma to become a Dharma practice, to turn the Dharma into Dharma itself, you take refuge in the Dharma jewel. And within the Dharma, we are talking about the Dharma which leads us to all-knowing. And therefore, we take refuge in the Supreme Sangha. So usually we have this habit of saying, may all the merits that I have attained through giving and so forth. But here we could say, may all collections that I have created through generosity and so forth, so forth, includes the other perfections, which is the within which there is the perfection of wisdom, and therefore we need to think about the self. When you say, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, or whatever merit I have created through generosity and so forth, we should think of ourselves, as we have already discussed during the last few days also, during the Mind and Life conference also. This sense of I is there in everyone, even animals. So if we humans use a special language, this is our own language, and we could actually make distinctions, subtle distinctions between the sense of I. So in other words, here we should gain an insight into the mere nominality and label status of the I, which is the Prasankhika Madhyamaka understanding and their assertion. So everything works in convention, and so in convention this I also works. And so when you come across the term I in this prayer, the one verse prayer, if you have, particularly if you have studied both, done the study of Prajaparamita and Madhyamaka, and since you are familiar with the term, as soon as you come across this term I, you should bring up this understanding that, this I does not exist, the way it appears to me, my mind. And so this insight should be brought up. You should have that understanding. And with that, if you recite this verse of taking refuge in bodhicitta, it's kind of kind of gathers or encompasses all the entire aspects of the path leading to Buddhahood. And please let us say this prayer. To the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, Supreme Assembly, I take refuge and am enlightened. To the collections of merit and wisdom by giving and etc. May I become Buddha to help all sentient beings. This is said 3 times. Is the tea hot? Still hot? Let us say the prayer for the tea, the blessing for the tea, or grace for the tea. So people who have come from around the world are gathered here. There are many of you, and particularly from different countries, people have come. You have come here with great interest. And I would like to all of you, I would like to welcome you all. You have come here with great enthusiasm and great interest. Of course, by language, you may have difficulty understanding me directly, but you have to rely on your interpreters. Even if you may not understand everything, but you may get understand something from these teachings. So in any case, because of your enthusiasm, you have come here with great interest. And so today, what I'm going to teach is the teachings of pertaining to epistemology. So with regard to the epistemology and logic, there may be few in Pali where the teachings use reasoning, but particularly in the Prajnaparamita teachings, you find mention of the reasonings. As Buddha himself has said, just as the gold is tested by the goldsmith, by rubbing, cutting, and burning, which shows how we should use the reasoning mind to analyze the teachings. And so, both the definitive and provisional teachings were given by the Buddha himself. So, whether to follow both literally or not, we need to use reasoning to say, oh, this can be taken literally and this cannot be taken literally. So that distinction has to be made but through reasoning and logic. And Buddha, Master Nagarjuna and others, by following the Buddha's own word, if you look at the subject matter of Sandhi Nimochana Sutra, which says that if you take the Prajnaparamita Sutras to be literally, therefore, the Sandhi Nimochana Sutra says that by having in mind the 3 naturelessness, the Buddha taught the 3 natures. And therefore, if you take the teachings literally, and there's no logical fallacy with regard to the Panchaparamita Sutras. But if you take the teachings of Sandhya Mochana Sutra literally, then you also go against reason. And so both Sandhya Mochana Sutra and Panchaparamita Sutras were taught by the same person, the Buddha himself. And therefore, if you, on the other hand, if you say, or if you say that, oh, this was taught by the Buddha, and take that literally, and another teaching also was taught by the Buddha, and take that also literally, then you have lots of contradictions. So I usually say that because the Buddha knows the mental dispositions of his disciples, he taught something at one point and another thing at another point of time. So it doesn't, which is not because of Buddha's own confusion, and when he was rather having a good time, taught something else. That's not the case. But Buddha was skillful and compassionate in teaching differently to different disciples. Therefore, because the teachings were given by him for the sake of his disciples, and because amongst his disciples there were beings of varying dispositions, therefore he gave the three turnings of the wheel of the Dharma, and you can see the different philosophical systems taught by the Buddha. And therefore you can see that the Buddha, because he taught in accordance with the mental dispositions of his disciples, you can see he was skillful and compassionate. And therefore, the fourth line in Prajnaparamita, Maitreya's ornament for realization, clear realization, makes sense, which says, homage to you, mother of... the third line, through being endowed with you, the omniscient sage can teach in various ways. And from this, what we can learn is that in accordance with the different geographical locations and time and so forth, different founding teachers of the different religious traditions also have taught differently, in accordance which could be taken as having been taught given those teachings in accordance with the dispositions of the people in different regions. And as part of the teachings, all the religious traditions also teach love, compassion, contentment, patience, and self-discipline. So, all religious teachings teach love and compassion. And because anger, since it actually destroys our peace of mind for oneself as well as others, therefore the different teachings, the religions also teach patience. And the philosophical differences amongst these religious traditions are because of the different mental dispositions of the followers. For example, in Pramanavartika and other teachings, there are the different logics used against the different assertions. So if you look at the world, there are many different religious traditions. And many of the religions also talk about our theistic religions. None of these teachings, religious traditions, say that God, they actually posit, is full of anger, but is one who is full of love. And therefore, anger is not considered precious, but compassion is. So even in the case of animals, if you actually scare them, I mean, they don't like it. So all religious traditions are good for teaching love and compassion. So in other words, in Buddhism, we are told to use analysis and reasoning to investigate the teaching by reason. And when you use reasoning, you see no logical fallacies in. If you kill logical fallacies, or logically, if you see contradictions or some fault in certain teachings, you should not take them literally. Whereas with regard to those teachings, if you don't find any logical contradiction or faults, then you should accept it. So in the case of Master Nagarjuna's text, he uses the fourfold reasoning, tetralemma, which says neither from self, nor from another, nor from both, neither from non-existence things arise. And Master Nagarjuna's spiritual disciple, spiritual son, Aryadeva also uses lots of reasoning in his 400 verses. And later, the Master Dignaga wrote text on epistemology. And then following him, I don't know if he was a direct disciple, but Master Dharmakirti also wrote 7 treatises on epistemology. And therefore, amongst all the masters of Buddhism, Dignaga and Dharmakirti were very important masters who focused on epistemology and logic, upheld that tradition. And so, for example, in today's world, we have China, which follows Nalanda tradition, and they also recite the Heart Sutra. And from China, Buddhism spread also to Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. They are also following the same. And Tibetans also follow the Nalanda tradition in Mongolia as well. Whereas Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and they follow the Pali tradition mainly. Of course, within the Pali tradition, there are the 3 baskets of teachings. They have Abhidharma, and then they also have the Vinaya, which is the monastic discipline, a code of discipline, and they have a very strict and very pure, excellent tradition of the monastic discipline. So in these countries where the Nalanda tradition has spread, we have the study of the texts on Prajaparamita and also recite the Heart Sutra. Nevertheless, it seems regarding the Nyaya Parvesha, door of reasoning or logic, I heard that in Chinese there is a translation of this text by Dignaga. Within Nyaya Parvesha, it seems there is one which is in versified form and another which is in prose form. Whereas in Tibetan, we have all these texts written by Dignaga and Dharmakirti translated. And on top of that, many Tibetan masters also have written texts on epistemology, particularly the treasury of epistemology or reasoning by Sajja Pandita is marvelous. And so Tibetan masters have written many texts on epistemology and also Madhyamaka texts, and therefore there is this saying of the yoked necks of epistemology and Madhyamaka, or middleweight philosophy. So someone who has studied Madhyamaka texts and wish to do practice, it is important for them to use critical judgment and analysis and investigation. For that, epistemological texts are very important. So if you look at all the countries following the Sanskrit Buddhist tradition, it's only the Tibetans you'll find who who have a very rigorous study of the Buddha Dharma through logic and reasoning. And therefore, it is very important to preserve this tradition. With regard to the epistemology, the Pramana Vartika, the commentary on the Pramana, I received a teaching from Gen Ringzin Tempa, from Kinor, and Ling Rinpoche also referred to me about an outline of this Pramana Vartika written by Chone Lama Rinpoche, and Ling Rinpoche actually exhorted to me in the future, if you ever have the chance to receive some teaching on Pramana Vartika, you could use that outlined by the Chone Lama Rinpoche. And therefore, because of this, having received this permission from my abbot for the monastery ordination, Ling Rinpoche, the text is now printed. And from Gen Ringzin Tempa from Kinor, when I received it, I think he received this transmission or the lineage from one monk, a geshe from Changze Monastery of Gaden. And when I was sitting for my exam, Geshe Haram exam, so two of the best Harambas would actually pose questions, challenges. And also two abbots would, so on the Lama Losa day, because the campus, the abbots were quite aged, it was a little bit better. But during the Gelpo Losar, the Geshe Harampas would really give strong challenge. And so again, Tagole was one of those who challenged me. So he was also sitting for Haram exam. So I still remember him very clearly when posing questions very loudly in his debate. And Gikang Khenpo from Tashi Lhunpo Monastery, the abbot of Gilkang house in Tashi Lhunpo Monastery, just before the upheaval in Tibet. So perhaps I'm not very clear, but I think Gen Ringzin Tempa received from Gilkang Khenpo or Gen Takole of Gen. Either Gen Ringzin Tempa received this teaching directly from Gen Takole of Changze, or Gen Takole received it from Gilkang Khenpo. I'm not very clear, and beyond that, I don't know who they received this from. And when with regards to Pramana Samuchaya, with regard to the salutation verse of Pramana Samuchaya, which says that I salute the one who has become authority, or one who has become a reliable guide, being motivated by altruism to benefit sentient beings, the teacher, Sugata, and protector. So I usually think this over, these lines. And then with regard to the teachings on these texts, I also received from the Pramana Samuchaya, I received from Gen Khenpo Kunga Wangchuk, who actually suffered gulag, life in Chinese gulags. and he came out of Tibet at one point, and when during one of our meetings, when we were talking, he told me that he had the transmission of the auto commentary of Madhyamaka Avatara, and also the Shiksha Samuchaya, because of which I was able to revive the tradition of teaching this text, Shiksha Samuchaya, and from Genrin Zitemba, I also received teachings on the ornament for clear realization, Abhisamaya Alamkara, and also Sutra, Mahayana Sutra Alamkara. And also the distinction between the extreme and the middle. And so then I also received the other text transmission of the other Kadamba texts from Gyalten Rinpoche as well. Therefore, by receiving these teachings, I was able to revive the 6 texts which were known to be classical texts of the Kadam tradition. And so Ten Rinpoche Kunga Wangchuk also told me that he had the transmission of Pramana Samuchaya as well, and so I received it. So I thought it's indispensable for me to receive this transmission, and so I did receive it. And he also gave me the transmission of this text with his annotation as well. I received it. And also the Pramana, the 2 other texts on Pramana written by Dharmakirti, which is Hedu Bindu, and the other text which is and there is also the teaching of the commentaries by Kedubje and Gyaltsabje on the Pramana Vertikam. And I have received the teachings on Semar Riktik, Hedu Bindu, Naya Bindu, and from Sangye Tenzin, Kempo Sangye Tenzin of Sakya school. So I want to start the teaching on the Pramana the texts. The other one is Pramana Vinishchaya. So with regard to the first Dalai Lama, he was actually exhorted by Rinpoche to focus on the teaching and spreading the teaching of Brahmanas texts, the epistemological texts. So this is not there, especially focused in the other monastic institutions of the Gelug tradition, the major monastic institutions. So therefore, I thought that if the teachings could be given at Tashi Lhunpo, we could revive this tradition as well. So from tomorrow, we'll continue with the Lamrim teachings. So I cannot do without, there's no other way, and I cannot do it without completing this teaching of the Lamrims. And therefore, with regard to the epistemological teaching on epistemological texts, this time we'll just begin the teaching, start it, and then later on, when we have more time, I will continue with this teaching. So with regard to Pramana Vartika, I have not really studied it in great detail. So when the time, around the time for my Geshe degree exam, I studied the Pramana Vartika. So it's very difficult for many of the Geshes to actually have memorized this, the 4. So Geshe Ngurdup Tsogni told me that he actually he memorized the Pramanavartika, but at the end he was not able to complete his memorization. He was left with few folios because the letters were so small and very congested. He told me it was very difficult. And then there was Sokpo Lobsang, Mongolian monk Lobsang. Many years ago, about 40 years ago maybe, we had a discussion. So he told me that there's nobody who could actually give a teaching or explain the Pramanavartika verse line by line, the whole text. And so one time Gen Yima asked me to give a commentarial transmission of this text, Pramanavartika. So there is a very unique tradition of passing on a lineage between me and Gen Yima. How that happened is I was reading the verses itself, and then Gen Yima himself was giving the commentaries, explanations. So that's a very unique way of giving a commentarial teaching. And so he had, when we went together over the text, discussing. And then I also received the teaching on the commentary by the Ocean of Reasoning, commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika. So after receiving that teaching, it had a special impact on me. I was feeling blissful and joyous after receiving this teaching on the Ocean of Reasoning, a great commentary on the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. So if you could, in the monastic institutions, for example, here, you could listen to the teachings from your teachers and then also think them over. It would be really good. And so Gen Asong was a monk from the monastic institutions, and later on became a hermit in Dharamsala. He said that even when he started studying and pursuing the Paramita studies, he started actually meditating. He got into Lamrim. And therefore, the purpose at the end of the day of studying all these texts is to integrate them within oneself, to discipline one's mind. And so Gyaltsab Je, in his commentary on Abhisamaya Alamkara, gives all the comments on Abhisamaya Alamkara, explanation of Abhisamaya Alamkara with commentaries by Haribhatra, and then also referring to a sutra. And then at intervals, he would say, give some instructions how to apply those teachings within oneself as practice. And he would also refer to Lamrim Chemo. So these negative emotions like cherishing attitude and our ignorance and so forth are so powerful within ourselves. But the counteracting factor for them is what is taught in these great texts, treatises. If you look at what they have taught and use them against your negative emotions, you can actually make the negative emotions rather dumbfounded. So I always tell that for Buddhists, it's very important for us to study the Dharma. So by using fully our human intelligence, so that this destructive emotions which make our minds unruly, undisciplined, could be curbed and slowly trained and disciplined. Then I also tell the Chinese devotees, who usually bring to lamas with some red envelope with money and say Amitobo, Amitobo. So maybe many lamas also like that, with the red envelope containing money. And so, because they don't have to go through any complications there. So, And the lamas were not so concerned about the practice being done by these masters, by these disciples, the Chinese disciples. There could be such lamas. So when these Chinese disciples bring the red envelope, say, reciting Amitabha, so they would, the lamas would sometimes could say, it's quite possible that they could say, oh, that's good. And so I tell these Chinese disciples that the Tibetan lamas are not looking for your red envelope with the money, but if you really check the lamas well, you could find lamas to whom you ask questions about the classical texts, the great treatises on Prajnaparamita and other subjects. In China, the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism went, and at least few centuries before it spread to Tibet. In Tibet, it spread perhaps in the 7th century. But 3 or 4 centuries before that, China already had. And so those texts that you have in your translation, in Chinese translation, you could actually seek explanations from these teachers, the qualified teachers. So I tell this to the Chinese disciples, devotees. And the Nalanda tradition emphasizes the importance of using reason and logic, and therefore Pramana Samuccaya and Pramana Vartika, of which we'll just begin with the teaching on the Pramana, the text. The three, what are known as the Dharmakirti, these 3 body-like teachings or texts on Pramana or epistemology. Perhaps I should start with the Pramana Samuccaya by Dignaga. There's no translation, so excuse us. Maybe in Chinese there is something. So in this book that I have, there's a short biography of Dignaga. So this is actually Pramana's Vartika, sorry. So Master Dr. Dignaga's work, Pramana Samuccaya. So the praise says he has outdone the non-Buddhist scholars and used reasoning to prove the reliability of the Dharma. He was born in southern India in a Brahmin family. And he became ordained under the abbot named Gyare Wangpo, Jinendra. And he received some teachings from Langpo Jin. So this abbot actually taught him the inexpressible, about this inexpressible self, and he was actually trying to find that, and by going naked and trying to find the self in all directions in the night with a bonfire, and then other disciples reported this to the abbot, and the abbot asked him why he was doing it, and he said, the inexpressible self that you told me, I mean, I'm trying to find that everywhere and I cannot find it. And so the abbot got angry and expelled him from the monastery. So usually there is a higher and lower Abhidharmas, and but the Perfection Wisdom Sutras are said to be ultimate Abhidharma text. And so the lower Abhidharma is those texts on Abhidharma which teach Abhidharma, which are common to even the Pali tradition. And then the uncommon Abhidharma, or the Perfection Wisdom teachings, is the higher or the ultimate Abhidharma. So in order to develop wisdom that can counter our ignorance, so he studied the Perfection Wisdom teachings, and he lived in a cave in solitude, and he wrote this subject. And so this is the verse of salutation of Abhidharma Samuchaya, Pramana Samuchaya, sorry. The one who became reliable guides, motivated by altruism to benefit sentient beings, the teacher, Sugata, protector, to you I make prostration. And I will compile into one text from all scattered treatises of mine in order to establish valid cognition that he wrote on the wall of his cave outside. And when he went out of his cave to seek food on alms round, then and came back, he found that what he had written on the wall of the cave was actually had been obliterated. And this happened 3 times, 2 times already. And at the 3rd time, he said that if you are doing this out of anger, please don't do this. If you wish to have argument with me, please wait. And therefore, when he found at the 3rd time, after his alms round, he came back, he found this non-Buddhist. And they had a debate. And then the non-Buddhist scholar actually was defeated in debate, but he used miracle to burn these robes of Dignaga. And at that point, Dignaga almost lost his altruistic intention, bodhicitta, thinking that, oh, I cannot even work for this single non-Buddhist person. And he almost, he actually intended to enter into the peace of the Shravakas, or the lower vehicle. And to determine that, he threw a slate in the space, and when the slate would hit the ground back again, and he promised that he would give up bodhicitta. But after throwing it up in the air, it never came down, and he was surprised, and he looked up, and there was Manjushri, and Manjushri told him, so you have, because you have met with the lower vehicle, now you are abandoning the working for all sentient beings. From now on, your master will be me. I will be your master until you gain enlightenment. And your text, write the text that you have intended, and it will become an eye of the world. And therefore, he wrote this text, the Pramana Samuchaya, and other texts, and its commentary as well. And then, in his dream, he saw many Buddhas, and he also gained lots of different types of concentration. And one time, when he saw in his dream, kings and so forth, with music, while he was asleep, he and as he was waking up from this, he heard this music, where together with the music, the king of that region was actually coming out on a walk, and the king also became, prostrated at the feet of Dignaga. So although he had many disciples, so he was never interested in giving lots of teachings. So he lived like an animal who's maimed, who prefers to live on its own, solitary. So he was also learned in the 10 different, he had the 10 qualities of a learned person, elderly person, and he lived in this place, which is the special site of the Gandapada, Mahasiddha, Pulahari. So it is said that Pulahari is somewhere in Orissa, so he lived there and passed away there. So in a forest. So this short biography of through this short biography, Kimbukunga Wangchu says that may all the obstacles be dispelled. So it says the authority, the reliable or valid teacher, Sugata, the one going through bliss, and the savior or protector, and the pioneer of the reason and logic, Dignaga, at your feet, and my teachers, my kind teachers, who have given me the path of reasoning, I prostrate. And then there is the meaning at the beginning, meaning of the text, the beginning of the text, and then the actual text, meaning of the actual text explanation, and then at the end there is also the conclusion, concluding remarks. And then with regard to the first, it says there are 2 parts. One is the name, explaining the name, title of the text, and also the verse of salutation by the translator. First, regarding the first, it says in the Indian language, it is called pramana, which means valid cognition, and samuchaya, which means compendium, and nama is the what is known as, and prakarana is the text composition into composition of the text. And in Tibetan, it says it's tema, or the valid cognition, which is the perfect cognition or understanding. And since this text has this subject matter, and since Buddhism is a tradition which tries to find the fact from reality, to borrow Deng Xiaoping's expression, he only says that, and there's lots of external material development. Modern education, modern science and so forth are focused on material development primarily. And now people are paying more attention to the inner development of our mind. And of course, in the text we mention, there's mention of the disparity between what appears and what is the reality. What we do is we follow after the appearance. And because of that, we are not able to get at the reality, the actual reality, but we only have certain expectation of the reality and think that is the truth. And therefore, we don't become realistic, to use an English term. So in order to be realistic, we need to know the reality completely, thoroughly, without which, whatever it may be, there are many dimensions to the same fact. Nothing is perfect from all, perfectly okay for us, and nothing is perfectly imperfect. So in order to fulfill certain temporary goal, we try to seek that and use all effort, and we are not able to achieve it because we have not been realistic. And so, as I said earlier, dependent origination comes from Buddhism, whereas the idea, that concept can be used in all kinds of fields of knowledge. For example, environment. We can see that the ecosystem, external ecosystem, is related to the internal. Sentient beings living in it, even if it may be one tree, there are lots of paths to it, branches, leaves, roots, etc. So many of the problems we face in the world and in our human world is because we actually seek truth from one dimension, looking at one dimension. So with regard to, as far as I'm concerned, after 1956, after I got back from India in 1957, then I started studying the Brahmanavartika, and after having studied it, every time I hear about something, immediately there is a question arising. Why this, why that, how this comes, and so forth. And so there's always these questions arising. And when you have questions, you would do, and you will analyze, check, and then you will see why things happen from different factors. So whatever things may be, whatever events there are, they happen through many different factors coming together. And therefore, you should actually see holistically, from this wider perspective, seeing all from this thing from all these different perspectives, and then try to find what you can take and what you should leave out. And that is actually how we should try to find reality through. In fact, so nobody in the world intentionally wants or wishes unhappiness or suffering, but everybody wants happiness. But we, as human beings, create a lot of problems ourselves. Here we are gathered, and everything is going well. We are discussing, engaged in this discourse. Everything looks fine. But at the same time, in Syria, how many people are being killed? We're all same human beings. How bad. So when you think about this, although we are same human beings, and some people are actually using others like toys. And so we cannot just stay idle, indifferent to this. We are praying for all sentient beings. We are talking about all sentient beings. So of course the beings in the other universe systems or world systems may not have direct relation or connection with us, but there are innumerable sentient beings on this earth. And of course, we cannot do much about the insects and the animals and the rest of the beings, like animals and so forth. But what we can do is, we can do something for the 7 billion people on this earth. And so when I have discussions with the scientists, I have found that our innate nature is compassion, human beings. So, in our text, of course, there's mention of all sentient beings having Buddha nature, and that we have this natural tendency or wish to be happy and not have suffering. And so when the scientists say this, I felt that if that is the case, then this can be actually enhanced through education. And therefore, if human nature is anger or hatred, then we cannot do much, perhaps. And so, since our nature is compassion and love, I found some hope. And so, this concept of interdependence of things, regarding this, in South India, in this Karnataka state, there are about 40,000 Tibetans living. So this, you also have connection with the rest of the states in India. And so if India as a whole faces problem, economic problem, you'll also be affected. And Indian economy and happiness and so forth, environment and so forth also is related to, connected to the East and West, other parts of the world. So this is the reality. While this is the case, if you only think about your own country, your own region, your own state, your own people of the same religion and so forth, it won't be good. And so, regarding this interdependence of things, it's a very vast subject. It's not about, we are not talking about, only Buddhists, but this concept is very important. So this was a talk taken off from the higher and lower Abhidharmas. So with regard to the title of the text, the Tibetan text says, so since this, the compendium of the Valid Cognition is a text which puts together all the, which has the subject matter of valid cognition, and then with regards to the salutation verse of Pramana Samuccaya, it says the one who has become a valid or authority. So, which means reliable, someone reliable for us to follow. How that person has become such is by understanding what actually causes problems in us, and also what brings about happiness, and what our goal of happiness and so forth is being able to make distinction between what is right and wrong. And therefore, also there is this innate quality of perception or consciousness, is being able to be aware of things, being able to be conscious of things. And so, if we also put effort in becoming such a person, an authoritative person who has actually gone through the process of purification, overcoming one's ignorance. And so it says the term kurpa, or becoming, shows there's a process, there was a process that has gone through to become a reliable person. And so in order to overcome our cognitive obscurations, to develop that counterforce to this. Of course, if I explain it from the Madhyamaka philosophical point of view, there's not much logical contradictions and logical faults. Whereas just staying with the Brahmanas tradition itself, or the lower traditions, philosophical traditions, there are lots of contradictions that you can find. And therefore, Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Buddhapalita, and the Chandrakirti and Chandarakshita, if you really read their texts, you'll find what they have said is very logical and reason-based. and I mean, you cannot counter their propositions and with reason. And so if you use those teachings for transformation, you'll see the transformation also happening over time. And so from the point of view of Madhyamaka philosophy, to make the understanding of emptiness as antidote, to become an antidote to our negative, called the obscuration to knowledge, in order for that, we need to develop bodhicitta. Therefore, this line in the salutation verses which says, thinking of benefit, thinking to benefit all sentient beings or wandering beings. So having developed this intention or the altruism to work for other sentient beings, now, to actually serve other sentient beings, as I said earlier, this quoted this line which says, Buddhas do not wash away the sins of sentient beings, nor do they, and so forth. I mean, this has to come through causes and conditions. So, of course, causes and conditions can be explained in relation to the outer world, but mainly we are here relating it to the inner world. And so, we have as countering factors for anger, compassion or love, and so forth. And the meditating on ugliness or repulsive nature of things to counter our desires, attachment, and so forth. But to shake the root of all these negative emotions, we need to go to the fundamental ignorance. So I think it is in the 23rd chapter of Mula Madhyamaka Karika. Perhaps it's this chapter which is on an examination of attachment, which says, exhausting karma and delusions, there is, I mean, you will have liberation. And it says that the karma and delusions also come from our improper thinking. Because of this improper thinking, we have actually what we see is that we have an exaggerated way of looking at the things, and therefore we develop attachment or anger. And so, with regard to this inappropriate thinking, which brings about the attachment and anger or hatred, once scientists, even some 10 years ago, I met him, and he told me that when we become angry, we see the person or the thing at which we are angry to be negative, absolutely negative. I mean, he is someone who has actually treated and researched, I mean, done his research on many people who have psychiatric problems. And through his experience over the years of his research and work, he told me that 90% of that ugliness or negativeness in the person is our own mental projection. So this is exactly what Nagarjuna refers to as namtok, coming from namtok, or this improper thinking or conceptualization. And so in Je Rinpoche's Tashi Tikchen and other texts, this is what he comments. So, of course, we need to rely on other factors which counter these temporarily as well. But if you want to go to the root, you need to go to this ignorance. And therefore, in order to serve others fully, I mean, we cannot just serve them fully without being able to counter and eliminate our own a cognitive obscuration to full knowledge. So if you engage in cultivating virtue by focusing on one person as an object, and if you actually have the entire sentient beings as your focus of that or goal, of course, the latter is much more powerful. And therefore, understanding emptiness, the suchness of emptiness, the reality of emptiness, is the one factor which is like the medicine, one medicine for all cures, all diseases. In order for this to become a factor for us to be able to serve others fully, you need compassion, bodhicitta. And so when you become fully enlightened, then you'll be able to teach others. Therefore, and it says in the text, the teacher. And in his action, he's able to give perfect teaching to others. That is the... And then, as a result of this action and of having engaged in the path, then one realizes one's own interest perfectly, and the sugata, or the one going to bliss, which refers to understanding of emptiness and having traveled that path perfectly. Beautifully. So because of understanding of the selflessness, the Buddhas become someone who travels beautifully. And so Nagarjuna pays his homage at the end of Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which says, I pay homage to the Gautama, who, out of his compassion, moved by his compassion towards the holy Dharma. So when you understand the import of these teachings, you will be able to really see the significance of taking refuge in the three jewels. So just relying on the Lamrim text by Rinpoche, you won't be able to move yourself to the practice of, with regard to the practice of this refuge, taking refuge. So when you are able to reason out why the need for taking refuge and what the purpose of that, through reasoning, then it really moves you. So that those of you who are engaged in learning and studying, and you need to also to understand the meaning of these lines to take refuge. As I said earlier, if you have good understanding of selflessness, when you say, I take refuge, and instead, Tantric sadhanas, it says, I instantaneously dissolve away. What does that mean? What does that I refer to? And within the I, there is the gross, subtle, and the subtlemost. And because of the basis of designation being in these 3 degrees of subtlety, and so when you say, instantaneously I dissolve into emptiness and I rise into some deity, you are actually referring, the reference point of that I is the subtlest self, subtlest I. And so Swabhava Shuddha Sarvadhamma Swabhava Shuddha Hang refers to selflessness of persons, and Shunnata Jnana refers to the selflessness of phenomena. And so since these are related with the highest Yoga Tantra, you first go through the dissolution process, go all the way down to the clear light nature of the mind, and then from there it becomes the basis of designation of the person. And when that mind is dissolved in emptiness, and that mind is ascertaining emptiness at that point. And therefore, every time you do sadhana, tantric sadhana practice, you have to go through this process of dissolution, meditating on emptiness. Otherwise, without this understanding, it doesn't really make much sense. And therefore, the Lhoda Mahasiddha Legi Dorje, Without bodhicitta, even if the recitation of mantras you may do a lot, you will be born as Rudra, as some evil being. It could lead to that. So Sugata, which means Deshek or Sugata, which means because of realization of selflessness, the Buddha has gone beautifully, which means, so it is like a beautiful person, a person with a good figure wearing jewelry. And so this shows some exceptional qualities which differs from the non-Buddhists. And then, because of having overcome the seed of view of self, the Buddha is gone to that state where there is no reversal. And then the rest of the line of salutation also refers to the Buddha being someone who has perfected the interest of others. So that is with regard to the term Kyopa, the protector or savior. And so salutation is made to such a person. Cautious. Rinpoche, cautious. And then the rest of the salutation verse, the next two lines of salutation verse was covered, and His Holiness covered also the first verse after the salutation of Pramana Samuccaya, which goes through the perfect, direct perception, inference. So these are the two perceptions or valid perceptions, because there are two different types of objects that. And then His Holiness moved on to Brahmana Vartika by Master Dharmakirti. And so, so the first verse is of the first chapter is salutation to Samandabhadra, who has cast aside the net of conceptual constructions. So the conceptual construction could be related to self-grasping and manifest himself in the profound and majestic bodies. So from the Dharmakaya, the Buddhas arise in the form in certain physical dimension, which actually are accessible to the sentient beings, and who sheds light penetrating into every side. And then the next verse is a verse to compose the text. The majority of people having attachment to ordinary pursuits and lacking in the requisite strength of intellect or understanding not only have no interest in and fail to appreciate the holy discourses, but being covered with the dirt of malice, even hate them. I do not therefore entertain the thought that this work of mine will be benefit to others, but to my mind, having developed an obsession fostered by prolonged study of science and scripture, is bent to compose upon this task. And so this verse actually shows that explicitly it says that it shows the fault of those who are not receptive to the teaching, and implicitly it actually urges the disciples, the receptive ones, to listen to the teaching. So Kunalama Rinpoche, according to Kunalama Rinpoche, the line here is which says that I do not, therefore, entertain the thought that this thought will be benefit to others. And now we'll go to the annotation by Khenpo Kunga Wangchuk. So, just like teaching the 4 annotated texts of Tantra, Gwe Samaja Tantra, I'm saying now let us go to this annotation. So this beginning of the text that His Holiness is reading is not in the text that we have been given. So in order to lead the disciples in the future into the path of reasoning, which actually defeats the positions of non-Buddhists or other traditions. The Dignaga wrote this text, which is the Dignaga wrote Pramana Samuchaya, the compendium of valid reasoning, cognition. And there are many commentaries to that text, and of which the best commentary is, as prophesied by, someone prophesied in the scriptures, the Dharmakirti. He was born in Trimalaya. Where is this place, Trimalaya? In South India. Tamil Nadu. Someone is saying that it's in Tamil Nadu. So the next state below this. So I pay homage, His Holiness says, to. So he was born also in a Brahmin family, and he was very bright even in his childhood. And because his father was an ascetic who was a scholar also, and he also became learned early on, and then he saw some Buddhist texts, and he found the Buddhist teachings to be true and his own tradition to be at fault. And therefore, he was expelled from his own community and his own religious community. And then he became a monastic. And became a bhikshu. And he studied the 3 Pitaka, the 3 baskets, and became very learned. And he actually listened to the teaching on Pramana Samuchaya 3 times and understood the text thoroughly. And he also did some practice of Tantra, and he had a vision of Heruka. So in order to defeat or outdo the non-Buddhist scholars, he actually acted as a servant of some non-Buddhist master at the time and became his servant. Since such non-Buddhist master actually held many instructions, like pith instructions, that were not even given to his wife or children. He learned many secrets of the Brahminical tradition of that person. And he also had a debate with Kumarila, and he defeated Kumarila and his disciples, and they were converted to Buddhism through that. And he also met with one Shankaracharya at that time, who was renowned to be a great scholar of non-Buddhist tradition or Veda traditions. And therefore, Dharmakirti was invited in Varanasi. He was invited, and in the midst of this debate, Dharmakirti outdid Shankaracharya in debate, and he became agitated, and he actually committed suicide jumping into the Ganges River. And Bhattaracharya, he was born as a Bhattaracharya, who was his disciple, Bhattaracharya's son. And even at a very young age, that boy was very bright and became a very accomplished master as well. And that boy had a debate with Dharmakirti, and he was again defeated by Dharmakirti. And again he took another life, rebirth, and was actually taken care by Ishvara, Shankara, or and Dharmakirti again had a debate with that person at in his third life now, in front of, making the king of that region as a witness as well. And therefore, Dharmakirti defeated all these great masters or scholars of non-Hindu and non-Buddhist traditions, and therefore many of them either committed suicide by jumping into the river and so forth, or they ran away. So Dharmakirti was renowned for upholding the teaching of the Buddha through debate with non-Buddhist traditions. So he was someone who made a great contribution for the spread of the Dharma, Buddha Dharma. So at death, he was when his body was cremated, the body became turned into a ball. And he wrote 7 treatises, which are commentaries to the Brahmana Samuchaya by Dignaga. And the Brahmana Vartika is the most extensive text. So there are 3 parts to comment on this. So the meaning in the beginning, the meaning in the middle, and the actual text, and then the conclusion of the text or the translation. So with regard to the first, it's a reference to the title in Indian language and also to the title in Tibetan. So since it is written in verses, it is called the Tsikleur Chepa or Karika. So Pramana, Vartika, Karika, and the commentary on valid cognition in versified form. And then next is the translator's homage, which is a homage to the noble Manjushri, the youthful noble Manjushri. This is in accordance with the decree of the Tibetan emperors in those ancient times. In accordance with the decree of the emperors, the texts which fall within the Abhidharma, a set of teachings, when they were translated, homage was paid to Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom. And then the Khenpo Kunga Wangchu goes through the annotation on the first verse, which says, "Prabhans is the property of logical subject, is necessarily concomitant with an element of its subject, and is necessarily of three varieties, since the necessity of invariable universal concomitance is limited to these. What are other than these three are fallacies of reason." And so, sorry, we are at this verse, which says the majority of people having attachment to ordinary pursuits and lacking in the requisite strength of intellect, we should make sure that we don't become such person, and not only have no interest in it and fail to appreciate the holy discourses, which means getting distracted towards the glamorous things outside, but being covered with the dirt of malice, even hate them. And so we should make sure that we are not, we don't fall into the category of beings with three faults of the vessel. The Dharmakirti is saying, referring to that, the annotation says. And so it is, implicitly, it is urging those who are receptive to their teachings to listen to the teaching. And I do not therefore entertain the thought that this work of mine will be of benefit to others. But my mind, having developed an obsession fostered by prolonged study of science and scripture, is bent upon this task that I desire to compose. And then with regard to the actual body of the commentary, or the meaning of the actual body of the text, which has 4 chapters, the author commentary of the text mentions, since the determination the determination of good from evil is necessarily grounded upon inference, and further there is a divergence of opinion regarding the same inference. The author states, for the sake of the determination of the issue, as follows. So His Holiness stops so with regard to Brahmana Vinishchaya, the determination of the logic or Brahmana, and Brahmana Kasa. It's 3 o'clock now. The time just flew by. I was like a clown here. The time just acting like a clown, made the time fly from me. I didn't feel tired as well. Naya Bindu, I'm sorry. will not go through these two. So let's not chant it, just say recite the prayer. May all my body in such virtue become the bliss for all my mothers, and may all their sufferings and its causes never totally ripen upon me. In short, as long as space and juice, as long as I'm wondrous things, so may I remain as a source of happiness and well-being, directly or indirectly. And then a prayer for the long life of, one verse prayer of long life of His Holiness.